Let's talk about the next 5 years.
Welcome back to The Next 5 Years, the podcast exploring how artificial intelligence is moving out the tech labs and onto the front lines of the real world business. When most people think about AI, they think of generative output like the chatbots, the text, the videos. But today's guest is proving that the most profitable frontier for AI is actually in the physical world. Marie has spent her career helping businesses navigate major technological shifts. She has built and led companies at the forefront of innovation, from enterprise software and cybersecurity, among others. Now, as a CEO of Vision Intelligence, she wants to transform one of the world's biggest industries, manufacturing, which still depends on skilled human operators. Her company combines AI, computer vision, and edge computing to improve productivity and quality while reducing waste on the factory floor. But to truly understand Marie's genius, you have to look at her narrative. She held a degree in music therapy, which back in 1992 helped her pioneer a framework called Marie's Wheel of Fortune, which ultimately became a brand new multi-billion-dollar category called customer success management. We'll get to that in a moment. Marie is an expert at helping small to medium-sized businesses design repeatable, predictable, and profitable systems. Today, we're going to dive into how AI is transformed the factory floor over the next 5 years, why companies fail when they don't design their business structure as diligently as they design their products, and what music therapy teaches us about getting employees to adopt AI. Marie, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Marie, just to kick things off, tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey. What brought you here?
Very interesting. I get asked that often. And at the core of what brought me here is I think I've made a lot of decisions where I just did something that sounded like it would be fun. There was nothing planned about it, but I started out early in my life at an amusement park, on roller skates and wearing shorts and sweeping up cigarette butts. And with that auspicious start, I was there 10 years and learned massive amounts about operations management and organizational behavior. I got a degree in music therapy and worked for a very short time in mental institutions with emotionally disturbed adolescents and adults, and then found myself with a master's degree in information systems and launched my career in the tech industry. And so I think that through each one of those different experiences, it has actually led to give me a very interesting background and a very different approach or vantage point to the way I would build a business or advise others to.
Okay, so now you've had an incredibly varied career from long time ago when you did your degree, I would have thought, and then your career spanned through enterprise software to customer success to cybersecurity, and now you are involved with a company which specializes in AI. Looking back, what experiences shaped the leader you are today?
Well, that's why I mentioned some of the things that I had done. I think the therapy degree absolutely influenced it. I think that therapy and leadership are exactly the same thing with just different lexicons. And it had also led me to the belief that everything that we're doing is behavior modification and that we're looking at the individuals that are involved and how do we influence that behavior to accomplish what we need to accomplish. And I think that's the part that gets left out most of the time when people are building companies or building software products or trying to grow an industry is they don't start with the people that are going to implement or guide this or grow what it is that you're doing. And so I think that that has absolutely influenced my leadership. And then I would say when I look at the companies that I've worked with, even though they are all quite different and in different industries, there's two things that are very similar in every one of them. Is every one of them has had a strong data component to it that it is all about the data that you're collecting and the decisions you make off of that data. And then the other part is just the size and what's the size of the company when I join. And it tends to be that point at which someone has created a product and now it's time to design the company. What is this entity that is now going to grow and become the company? And so that's the same thread through everything that I've done. So I think those experiences I've learned a lot through all of it, and my thinking has grown and shifted and become deeper in my thoughts on the impact of each of those things.
I think you're referring to, I know your philosophy, which is product is important, but, companies should be, you know, the, the concentration, the focus should be on how to build the company properly. So to be able to take it to the next stage or the next level. So we'll come to that later in this conversation. But right now you're working for Vision Intelligence.
Mhm.
Uh, Tell us a little bit, those people who haven't heard about this company. So what does this company do? What kind of problems you guys are solving at Vision Intelligence?
This becomes a very broad conversation. I look and let's just take it and focus it primarily on the manufacturing space. But keep in mind that this type of technology can be used anywhere that you need to record and codify what could be seen. And you think, why would I ever need to be codified what I can see? So if you start out and think in a manufacturing environment, that most often people think that the way that they can understand what's going on their manufacturing floor is a time and motion study. And historically, what that has meant is that you have to put somebody in a white coat and give them a clipboard and a pen and a timer, a stopwatch, and have them go out on the floor and just on a sheet of paper, tick marks and put notes. um, in doing that, you're going to have the Hawthorne effect. You're affecting the behavior that's there. You have to plan it in advance that you're going to do it. Um, Often after you've done it and you've spent 2 weeks taking all that data and putting it into a database and analyzing it, then you come back and think, oh, you know what? This is the data we should have collected. Or if you collect this data and you've done a time and motion study and you make a change, now you need to do another one in 3 months to understand the impact of the change. And so that can be quite costly. If you think about it, that person, that industrial engineer is $50 an hour. That's a lot of money that you're spending on that. With this device and this technology that Vision Intelligence and others have produced allows it to go in and there's a camera in a box that's just over the area and it's just watching what's happening. And as soon as the camera sees something, if you tell it you want it to record, what you want it to detect and write into a database, it's doing that. It's just passively watching what's going on and creating a database. And then from that database, it in real time is creating your time and motion study. So if I wanted to do one starting today, I could have it by the end of the day and it would already be in report form. So it very rapidly condenses the time it takes to collect data and reduces the costs of collecting that data and allows it to become ubiquitous in nature. And so once you can do that, I've often laughed when people talk about this in terms of AI. I still believe it's more about big data. It's about you're using AI in the first case to go collect that pristine primary data that you need to have to make operational decisions so that you're not sampling, you're not approximating. This is fact. This is what's happening. But then over time, as that collects, that's where you can begin to use generative AI or predictive models, et cetera, because you've got enough data and it's exact data in order for it to be clean, to give you the clean results that people have so wanted to have for decades.
Okay, so sound like so your computer vision, the technology, to capture the real time data or the real time action, actually, if you like, on the factory floor and turn them into actionable insights.
Mhm.
So, well, that's great. But what I'm curious to understand from you is how does AI move beyond simply collecting the data and generating actionable insights to actually helping the leaders make better decisions?
Well, a couple of things. One, I'm going to back into what I was talking about before is that you have to decide what decisions you need to make so that you know what data to collect, right? And so I think a lot of times people have not stopped and thought, what is it that I need to know, right? And so when you back up, I think that the immediacy of the data and the information to have helps you make a better decision. If I am having stuff and I have to do that time and motion study, or I have to be walking the plant floor to see it, or, I don't know it's a problem until it's already backed up and I've already got a problem on the floor. If you've got something that's watching and can detect, it can alert you very quickly. So you're moving from a reaction mode to seeing that your production has slowed down to a prevention mode where it immediately determines you have a problem here, go fix it. And it could be that things are backing up. It could be that you are detecting that a step has been missed that's going to be catastrophic, and you want to stop the manufacture of that before it goes any further. So you go pull it off the line. And so in some ways, when you think about the decisions that you make, you need the immediacy of the information to make the decision. Looking at it in hindsight, I can't prevent. And so this allows the prevention that what you would want to have.
So does it mean that those insights or that decision making actually is potentially a cost saving exercise, or could that lead into some kind of strategic or competitive advantage for the organization?
I think it could be both. I kind of paused for a minute because I was talking about the immediacy of the data. But the beauty of this is that you're getting that alert and you're seeing it. But at the same time, it's stored in a database. So now I can look at what went on and what happened contextually, right? So, kind of two things on that. One, I worked with one account that manufactured dishwashers, and they had dishwashers and some of them leaked. And so they were trying to determine how. And if you think about it short term, people are taking these systems and they're watching and making sure someone's following the standard of work that they were given to follow. And you can identify where they weren't following it. Now you think, oh, I need to go correct that. But what you really want to do long term, in my opinion, is you want to have these cameras and these systems everywhere. So it's just recording everything. But I have massive amounts of data and I know everything. All the variables are there. And then I take and create a file of all the dishwashers that leaked and a file of all the dishwashers that did not leak. And now I'm running the AI against that file to tell me what's the difference in those two files. Where are the variables difference, which is going to lead me to what's different and what's causing the leakage, right? What's different in this? Or when I was speaking to this executive at this plant, he said, oh, but wait a minute, what you're telling me is if I know where the scratch on the front panel was coming from, where it was occurring. And I laughed and said, yes, I can go in and tell you which serial numbers are probably scratched. And I think the fascinating thing about this is that we think about this as being new technology. And I have a friend that back in the 80s was working for, I believe it was Motorola, and they manufactured the chips on these big wafers. And he had written the code to let them know that these chips are fine. These chips are definitely bad. And those are the ones that you need to do a QA check on. And he saved them millions by identifying that. But it's that collection of larger amounts of data so that it can go into the data and find where those variables are and where those variables differ. And so it is this mix where I can make faster operational decisions and I can prevent things, but I can also go back later and understand through the analysis. And really, once you build that database up, you can begin to use the generative AI and other things for it just to be watching the data itself. And you can expect to get a report back that says, you need to look at this. I'm noticing this trend. without you even asking it the question. Or you could, in just English language, ask something like Chat GPT or Anthropic on top of that database to say, what's going on with this? And it can take that data and give you the answer back. And so when we look at it with what Vision Intelligence has done, there are three different types of AI that are being utilized in the technology. And one is that of detection. And we're using something called cascading convolutional neural networks. And I might have gotten that backwards, but at any rate, you're using that type because that's the best thing to use for detection. But then once it's in the database, you're using causal AI models to detect things, to give you the alerts and to create the reports. But then over time, now that I've got latitudinal and longitudinal data, I'm going to use generative AI and other things to go back and study that and identify things that I'm not even asking it to tell me, that it's finding the things to tell me.
That's very interesting, actually. This is very, very interesting, cutting edge. I was wondering, because your technology is watching pretty much everything that's going on the factory floor. That means it's also watching what people are doing, the actions they're taking, which means that people who know they are being watched, they might be going through the feeling that maybe surveillance or maybe Big Brother is watching them, or may even start fearing kind of some kind of job losses down the line because of insecurity. I
Yeah.
mean, Wall Street Journal actually reported recently that even executives, they are feeling very, very threatened by the AI. That's the executives, professionals, and people on the factory floor. They probably are going to feel the same down the line. So, how do you deal with that?
Well, I think that that goes back to my music therapy case and the way that I'm watching that. But we always go in and talk about those people on the factory floor to begin with. And that this is not, I mean, when you think about it, the low hanging fruit for replacement with a robot, that's already happened. That train has already left the station. And so what we're doing is looking at jobs that are probably in many cases always going to be done by a human being, right? And especially in some cases by smaller and middle-sized companies where they can't afford to go buy robots, right? And so when you go in to do a project like this, you want to begin to introduce it a little bit at a time. You want to do it in a way where the people on the manufacturing floor are involved in it from the very beginning, right? And when I've gone in, even in the sales process, I've had the people I'm talking to take me out on the floor. And I talk to the people that would be like, one of them was a manufacturing plant where they're making jeans. Another has been a manufacturing plant where they're making furniture. But with this furniture, it's not big production stuff. It's each time an order comes in, it's variable. They're making that just one off, that sofa. And so when you look at that, you begin to show them how, number one, I want to record what you're doing so I can use that to teach other people when they come in. I can look at it and say that I can use this to train people. Once I've done this and I've recorded what the best practices are, then I can use a tablet and it will guide a person through what they need to be doing. If it's a manufacturing plant where you've got 4 people that are building this one big unit and they have to know what the others have done, the camera's keeping up with that. And then it always is showing on the screen what's already been done. So you know whether it's time for you to jump and do your part or not. If you can be trained on this, then when you go into a plant where it is a line manufacturing plant, now everyone can learn each one of the jobs because the training costs are so low that I can have that tablet. And so that gives me more flexibility with my staff. If someone's called in sick, I can move people around, or people can do different jobs. They aren't doing the same thing every day of their life. They can now begin to understand why something being done in the second station, how that impacts fifth station. And what you often see is then the employees begin to come back and say, oh, there's a better way. And so and they can propose that to management, and then they're allowed to put that in place. and now they're empowered and they can prove that their idea worked. And then the last thing I would say that with the employees is quite often I've seen it where it's watching to see if anybody's gotten hurt, or I can go in and do a study to determine I've got repetitive motion injuries that are going to occur by the camera just counting how many times is that done. Or I'll give just one more example, um, where at one point there's one car manufacturer that thought that their third shift was they had a training problem. That's what they thought. And then within a week, we were able to come in and tell them, no, you don't have a training problem. The productivity isn't low because of that. What you found is they had one guy that was their best guy during the day. And then we were showing them a cycle time that was quite long. And they said, oh, I can't wait to see this. And it was the same guy. And what it was is that the lift to lift this engine up kept messing up in the evening shift. And so it was the lift that was the problem. And it was the lift and that problem that they had the turnover problem because it was just too hard to do the job. And so when you can begin to see those things that you just aren't seeing, right? And it's not anybody doing a bad job. It's just that you can't have enough visibility. You can't hire enough people to see everything that's going on. And so I think that explaining to your staff what it is, allowing them to be involved in and a part of it, allowing it to empower them. Uh, dishwasher company actually spoke often about democratizing quality in the plant, right? And so, I mean, and even at one point when I was talking to someone said, yeah, but what you're going to do is get rid of the industrial engineer. And I said, no, I'm going to give the industrial engineer all the information they need so that they can make good decisions and they're not standing out there with a stopwatch trying to get the information that they need to have. And so it's about education and it's about, again, doing a little bit of it at a time so that I can have everyone's subconscious belief system transition as we go along. So we're not throwing something big out and creating cognitive dissonance. If people know what's going on and you allow them to participate, then they tend to be very supportive of it. Now, that said, I have worked on projects where the management did exactly what you're talking about. And as a vendor, I was always having to go replace the cameras or figure out why people had put paint over the camera or whatever. But every bit of that was because of the way the management implemented it. We often think about it that we are really working to improve and revolutionize the manufacturing process so that it becomes a much more humane work environment to where you can begin to attract employees to come in and work in that environment because they feel more valued and that they're working with management. So it can go both ways, as with most any technology in the wrong hands.
I totally agree. Now, most of the examples you refer to, they are parts manufacturers, the furniture manufacturers, etc. So they are very kind of traditional, old school kind of industries. I know most people have heard of AI by now, and most people see AI as kind of generative AI, can generate text, videos, etc., etc. But when you start talking about your technology, what kind of challenges you face when you're talking to the executives in these companies? They're used to kind of old school ways, and kind of in a way, is that an educational process, or do they get this pretty much straight away?
You know what? Most of the time, I think they get it straight away. And I think a lot of times when you go in and you begin to explain this to them, they're a little bit relieved because it becomes very tangible to them, right? That you're looking and you're saying, I'm going to be able to. There was one guy I talked to that by the time we finished talking, he goes, this would give me a return within a week, right?
Wow.
I would get value out of this within a week. And so I think that the big thing that I look at in talking to executives and that I would say to small and mid-sized companies in particular is that everybody's throwing a lot of technology at you at this point, and they're talking about AI, they're talking about generative AI, and most of the time people are thinking, I have no idea what any of that means, but they feel like we convince them through the tech industry, you have to do this or you're going to be falling behind. You're going to, I really encourage people, don't look at it as AI. Think about what is the problem I need to solve in my business? What is holding me back? And if someone comes in, don't let them talk first. Tell them, this is my problem. This is what I need in order to grow my business. This is what I'm struggling with. And find out whether AI can help that. Don't do it just for the sake of it being AI. I find that's probably why so many things don't really get off the ground. I go back to my Six Flags days and laugh about it because I was doing marketing and operations research. And I remember the first year I did it, I got and gathered all the data and had a book this thick about all the operations from the past year. And I was told after they looked at it, they said, fix it, right? The numbers weren't creating the story that they wanted. And so the following year, as I designed the programs, I had learned to start with the report. And I would tell people, I'm not doing that unless you can tell me what operational decision you're going to make off of that information, right? And so quite often I think we give solutions for people to get so much information, but most of it, they're never going to make a decision off of. And that's, probably another one of my leadership things that I focus on, that I'll just throw it in here. Doesn't have to do with AI, but again, Six Flags, my boss there made me a supervisor, and I think I was maybe 19 years old. And he said to me, I pay you now to make decisions. Because if you make a good decision, you did your job, you did it well. If you make a bad decision, you did your job, not as well as we'd like, and we'll fix it. If you don't make a decision, you didn't do your job and you don't get to keep it. And
That's
so,
that's so fantastic.
exactly, right? And I just think sometimes the lessons we need to have are so simple, but I think that is with AI, are you doing it because of that you're told you're supposed to implement the technology, or are you looking at what is it I need to do? Because it's just another way of doing what was already done most of the time. It's speeding it up. It's giving me information more quickly. Um, and I think often with my background, I have done a lot with customer success, and people think that, they've asked me, how would you use AI for customer success? And I tend to say I wouldn't, right? I look, unless it's to gather data, unless it's to understand my customers better, for me to understand what variables are changing things in the results. But to go use that to replace someone that's going to have a human contact with a customer, I I I don't like that. I'm old fashioned that way. And I think that, I mean, you and I've talked about this before, that I would use the AI to determine how to get rid of the call so someone didn't have to call my support group, right? This is what we talk about with designing the company, is design it so that if something could be handled in one call, then that call shouldn't have to happen, right? You should have been able to make sure the customer had what they needed. And so that analysis, that understanding of everything that's happening, and then running the systems to understand that, to tell me how to change my operations to improve them, I think is a brilliant use of AI.
You touched on customer success.
Yeah.
Customer success management is obviously a big industry today, multi-billion-dollar industry. Rough estimate, about 12, $13 billion a year industry or category right now. And, lots of books have been written, business schools, they teach this discipline these days pretty much everywhere. But then it all started with something called Marie's Wheel of Fortune. So
Um,
tell us, what is that all about, and how did it start?
well, at that point, I was working for Harbinger in Atlanta, and I began to look at it. I'm trying to determine how to make this, that a short conversation, but we had an approach where we were selling EDI to the suppliers of a large company. And so what I found very quickly in the services area that we didn't recognize revenue until someone had installed. That was the model. We had to get them installed. It didn't matter really how much we shipped. It mattered how much we got installed because that's where the revenue was going to come from. And so at that point, that's a long time ago, and people had modems, right? They had external modems. And so it was quite a big deal to get these small mom and pop shops up and running on a modem. And so, and inevitably what we do is we would ship the product and you had 90 days to get up and running with your trading partner that was telling you they had to do EDI. And so I set up a team and we proactively called them to have them install, right? And we would say, hi, I'm calling, I'm going to help you get installed. Can we schedule an hour so I can make sure you're up and running in production before you have to make a purchase decision? Well, when we started doing that, we found that 95% of the time, if they installed, they kept it. And that had been the model before we were proactively, but it was the act of getting them to install. So that became very cost effective for me to have that proactive service. But then what happened one day was this one person came in and said, Marie, you got to stop them. The sales reps are shipping. But crap, I'll clean it up. And I said, okay. And she goes, you have to tell them they can't do that. And I said, no, we just need to put something in the system so that you know they did that. And so our call is going to change. So we're going to call and say, hi, your sales rep, Mark, came over and he was very concerned that he shipped you the product when you just wanted a demo. And so he asked me to help you get it installed and walk you through everything so you can see the real software and not the demo and you get your questions asked. 95% of those people kept. So now we've got it to where we know that the revenue is coming from what the services organization is doing. But in that case, what happened was if you were electronic data interchange, at that point, you had a template and you had to send a different, what was called a transaction set to different partners. If you were working with DAG, you had to send something different than what you were sending to Compaq or to another company. And so these people were little mom and pop shops. And so there's no way they could understand that. So there'd be a template that was in that software for that customer. And people were charging probably $395, $500 for each one of these templates, which I looked at very quickly and said, that's going to hinder adoption because they have to pay more money every time. So I went to my CEO and said, I just want to charge for a subscription. And they can have as many of those templates as they want for that subscription. He says, Marie, you're giving up revenue. And I said, no, I think I'm going to have a recurring revenue, right? And I said, you're forgetting the fact that as soon as one of them wants me to create the template for Compaq, then I can give that to 15 other customers. And then I can go into Compaq and show them how easy it is to bring customers up on our product. And so when I looked at it, we used to talk about customer loyalty is what people talked about, but it's really about customer advocacy. And that closes that loop. You have a closed loop. So as soon as I have customer advocacy, now they are the ones that are sending new customers into my marketing organization or to the sales organization. So that's where you begin to get the tornado that we've all read about with Jeffrey Moore. There's 2 books that I've ever thought were just the most brilliant books. And that was one of them. And the other one was Total Customer Service by Bill David Out. I took it apart when I read those 2, but my wheel of fortune was that I took services and it was the profit center for the company at that point. And that we were looking at it and saying, I was literally having customers pay me to generate my leads for the next customer, right? Instead of me having to pay for marketing. And so that's what when you were saying that I talk about designing the company, I think you have to look at it and design the whole cycle and how all of those things are aligned. And I think that in building a company, you mentioned it, but in building a company, I come in when their company has a product. And I think most companies don't stop to build the company. They don't stop to understand what are the variables, think of it as a science experiment. I have a hypothesis and I either prove or disprove my hypothesis. And if I disprove it, then I change. what I'm doing until I get everything aligned. And that's the time when you go grow a company. So I think a lot of times they get that taste of a little bit of revenue. And I think because I sold it to 2 companies, I can sell it to everyone. And you mentioned before about you get a repeatable, predictable, profitable process in place. And then you go after the growth because you know what you're doing. So
So is that why you say that the companies rarely fail because of a bad product, but they fail because the organization hasn't been designed with the same care?
yeah, it is. And I think that you can fail with a bad product, don't get me wrong. But I think quite often I've seen industries like the customer support or Salesforce automation industry. You had Clarify, Scopus, Remedy, Siebel, Vantive, um, now Salesforce. They all succeeded. They all had relatively good products. Every one of them had the value in avid followers. But I will say that early stages of that market, Tom Siebel came in and he built a better company and he went further. He went further. He started negatively affecting our ability to keep growing our revenue, but he was maniacally focused on execution, right? And he had a plan and he knew exactly how he was going to do it. And I told investors or talking to people after that, I said, that will never happen to me again. That won't happen to me again. I will always build the best company. And that's how you're going to get there. Because I do know companies that don't have good products that are making they have a lot of revenue.
You're also a prolific writer, and one of the themes running through your writings is that AI isn't really a technology challenge, but it's a leadership challenge. What do you mean by that?
Um, well, really that goes back to what I've talked about today, and that it is about behavior, right? I think anytime you have any technology, you have to design the technology so that you can slowly but surely adopt it within an environment. And you have to lead those people to want to accept it. You have to be selecting things and putting stuff in place so that you know behaviorally that you can create the behavioral integrity in this company to use this every day. And I think that that's what services organizations are challenged with historically. And I see it still all the time is that you've got a sales force that's out there selling all kinds of things in. But then with the support team, the product's not designed so that I can go get that buy-in from people, or the leaders in the company where I'm trying to get it implemented or just wanting to put that in place and just tell people to do it. And I think that you have to lead them. You have to inspire them to get there. And then I think the other part of the leadership is, I'll go back to what I said. It's about being decisive. I mean, I'll give another example that I was lucky enough at one point to spend an entire day with the executives at Microsoft as a part of this group. And I remember sitting and listening to Steve Ballmer, and he told the story about them in a 2-week period acquiring another company. And it was all done through email. They never had a meeting associated with it. And where it came from is an engineer looked at what was being done and sent an email to a senior executive and said, why are we spending the money to build this? This company's out there and we should just buy them. And someone looked at that and said, you're right. And in 2 weeks, they bought them. Now, remember, there were some people in this group I was with that came back and said, oh, we need to be better with email. And I said, no, I think you missed the point. I think you missed the point. You need to make a decision, right? Make the decisions. And so a lot of times leadership is about decision making, right? I my brain, you've talked to me before, I jump all around, but that's where a lot of times people will say to change your price point so that you can get it down to where a middle level manager can make the decision to buy it. Problem there is that if you have a $2 million cost point on something, it kicks it up to the senior level, and that person's at the senior level because they can make decisions. The person is stuck at the middle level sometimes cannot be decisive enough to make a $60,000 purchase. And so you've got this catch 22 in there. So I think that quite often people want to throw technology at it when you need to look at it as technology needs to be supporting people, not the other way around. And I think
Totally
that
agree.
systems are built for people to support the technology.
We are entering in an era where AI allows small teams to generate massive top line revenues. And we have people on record saying that it wouldn't be too long into the future when we might see 1 or 2 person companies, getting to the $1 billion status in valuation. So that's a kind of uplift we are looking at from an AI point of view. But then you say that all the revenue can be just a mirage, and you call it millionaire's mirage. What do you mean by that?
I think that there's Mirage. I noticed that on the list. I didn't think probably that people look and think I can go create all that revenue, right? And it often doesn't pan out. I mean, if you look at it and you think about it, that I go back to the movie Moneyball, right, where he looked at it and realized it's not about home runs; it's about base hits, right? And I think everybody's thinking, how do I go create that that unicorn, and then I have to get to this big amount, right? Where quite often, again, if you're designing your company and you can understand where you can get it, sometimes you design where there's a friend of mine that he had a company, he never took any money from a VC, and he just propagated it on the internet. Now he's probably got 30 people in his company, but he's bringing in $53 million a year and dropping 39 million to the bottom line. And every bit of that is his money, right? And so when you look at it, this whole idea of that I need to go do this and have something big so that I can get the valuations on it so that we can sell the stock to make that millions. I think maybe it's time to and I think a lot of entrepreneurs are realizing maybe that's not the best model anymore. How do I create something and build up a certain amount of revenue, but I don't have to be at 100 million for me to make money, right? I think you need to be 100 million for a VC to make the money. But I think they start going after that revenue. And this is probably an entire podcast to talk about this, but I think that people start going after revenue. And where my brain just went is that quite often when you're looking at a company, you need to in fact, I told an investor this at one point that he was talking to me about the product. And I said, that's interesting. You're asking so many questions about the product. And he said, why? I said, you need to be asking me about the asset because you're investing in the asset. The company is the asset. That product, I need to use that to get somebody to buy into it. But what is your asset? Where's the real value of your company coming from? Is it from having, 2 million cameras out there that I can do other things and add on to them, right? That I have the growth model that's been built out. And so if somebody wanted to buy my company, there's the value. Or is it the data that I collected? When we sold Quova as a company, people really bought the company because of the infrastructure and the platform we had built. And because of the data, I had a database that had 4.2 billion IP addresses in it, and I'd known exactly where they had been for 10 years and how all of them moved around. And so that data set was an asset. And so when someone valued my company, they weren't really looking at my revenue and they didn't go after the revenue after they bought it. So I think that sometimes that's kind of lost by people thinking that the revenue is the path. And I think that's probably what I was thinking about.
I think you're totally right, actually, the value. But then at the end of the day, the initial conversation, they usually focus on, in terms of valuing the companies, they usually focus on the revenues and the top lines and bottom lines, etc. But maybe follow-up conversations should, focus on the value, the assets, etc. But then yeah, you're right. Uh, that initially everyone just focused on just one thing, the top line, and that's pretty much
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a thing that has amazed me over years is that companies that have huge revenues that are still not profitable.
Yeah. Oh, I know quite a few.
I, and so, yeah. And so when I look at it, if the people that are listening, that you're a small, mid-sized business and you're trying to decide to grow, just look at it. And I still believe in getting to profitability, get to be self-sustaining, right? And I don't even know that you need to be, depending upon how you're growing the company, sometimes growth doesn't make it better.
Yeah. Yeah.
Accelerated growth, if I can get something to where it's profitable and it's steady state and I'm employing people, there's a real value to that. And you've got a very, I think it's kind of interesting. I was reading about M&M Mars, the Mars Corporation. They've always been private, very quiet about everything they do. And it's a family business and they've grown it slowly and steadily. And part of where they grow it is through acquisition, but it's it's not always about the growth, right? It's about the sustainability and the profits that you have in it. And I don't know. I could wax and wane on for hours just about the fact that I think we need to bring social responsibility back into what we're doing here with technology. And again, that goes back to what I said earlier about um, it being about what's the problem? What's the problem that you need to solve? And so if someone's everybody's telling you need to go do AI, everybody's telling you that this is going to be the next big thing. Decide what you need to have done and understand how it's going to solve something for you before you go after it. Don't do it just because everybody's telling you need to do AI. When you look at it, stop and think it through on, does that really give me a result? Or is that a problem I have? Sometimes it's not even a problem that someone has, but people just want to adopt the latest, greatest thing because we convince them that they should.
So you mentioned about AI. So what's the difference between adopting AI and becoming an AI enabled organization?
Um, it's a very interesting question. Um, I would say I can go in and put all of the systems in place for everything to be enabled. I'm always my brain jumps to, it's kind of like somebody buying a gym membership to say that my company is AI enabled. But unless people begin to use it and it becomes part of their daily routine, and until I begin to see a result from having used it, it's not really adopted, right? It's enabled. I could go in with our system and put all the cameras and all the units in place and say that this facility is computer vision enabled. But unless someone goes back and says, okay, put this detector on there, put this detector on there. Oh, now I see that. And where someone's thinking about it every day to where they aren't even thinking about the fact that they're using it. Right. I mean, I think you and I are speaking here, Zoom, right? Or on a Google Meet or whatever. And 10 years ago, I don't think we ever would have thought that the adoption would be there in this way. And with Vision Intelligence, we worked together, the team, for 2 years, and none of us had ever been in the same room. None of us were ever in the same room until probably about a month ago. I went to a conference and I met two of the main people on the team. And that's the first time we shook each other's hand. And it was fascinating to me that I felt like I'd known them forever. It wasn't a big deal to see them for the first time. But that speaks to the adoption of what we're doing with video conferencing and video phone calls and everything. But when it first came out, it was available. My phone was enabled, my computer was enabled, but I didn't use it the way that I do now. Right. And so I think that is where I would say the adoption is, it's there, but is anybody using it? Is anybody getting any value out of it?
Many people listening to this podcast, they run businesses, the leaders maybe, or the work in the businesses, which are kind of relatively small businesses, maybe 30, 40 employees, maybe 200 employees, 500 employees, maybe. So if you walked into one of those businesses tomorrow, where would you tell them to start with AI?
That it, I, I, I would probably first do a lot of discussion with them to find more about their business. So jumping into it, I think to give just a pat answer would be difficult. But if I, in just this context, I would probably say they are most likely going to use it for some type of generative AI in a company, and not have one of the other uses of like computer visioning or anything. And quite often they're not going to have enough data collected in a database for me to turn that loose for me to do the analysis. And in some ways that's really just statistical analysis. And so I probably tell them to use it the way I've used it. I go in and I might come back in one day, say, give it a bunch of data, right, on one of the platforms and say, can you organize these thoughts for me? Can you give me an outline of this? Or I can give them all of the data that I know about a company that I'm about to having a meeting with and say, can you take these ideas and create the slide deck for me for this meeting? Right. And so then I take it and I review it just like if I was working with somebody on my team, right? Only they're a lot faster than me asking somebody on my team to create that. And this is where I understand why executives and people in businesses are worried about this, because I do use it in that way. Or I know that I spent like too much trying to find certain statistics and numbers about how many manufacturing plants there are and how many stations there are in all these manufacturing plants in the different industries. I spent countless hours trying to find that data. And finally, I went into one of the generative AI systems and told them what I was looking for. And in 5 minutes, I had all that information that I'd spent so many hours trying to find. And the thing that I would tell people is it's important for you to learn how to use it. It's important to learn how to ask the question the right way. It's important to require that if you're telling it to go find information for you, for it to come back with the references from where they found the data. I want links that will tell me exactly why you're telling me that. I would say that it's important. I'm sorry, my battery is going out in my computer. I need to plug in my power cord. Sorry. There we go. I would say that you need to have a way to go back and verify the information that you just got, because sometimes it's not good information, it's incorrect. I would also tell you that you need to, or at least for me, I had to go in and give the precursor to it and say, okay, I need you to review what I've done here. Tell me what you like, what you don't like, and then say, don't be nice to me. Because what you're going to find in these tools that you're using, they're going to tell you you're brilliant. They're going to tell you things that make you feel good about yourself so that you keep using that. And so you have to, if you give it the instruction to be harsh, be critical of me, then it will do that. I think that you have to come back and challenge what it said. I'll share, this one could be kind of a fun one for everyone. At one point, I went into one of them and said, I have to interview Marie Alexander the person who is credited with having first authored customer success management. I said, what would be the questions that you would ask her? And it came back with this list of questions. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And then it came back and said to me, would you like me to show you how I think she would answer them? And so I said, yes. And it came back, and I'd say about 50% would be the way or close to how I would have answered it. And then I argued with it for a little bit. And then I finally came back and I said, well, at this point, I will tell you I am Marie Alexander. And so it was a complete conversation with me. Oh, wow, that's really cool. And then it started asking me questions and stuff. And then I ended it with, I hope that you don't go update your databases with this conversation. And it was, why? Because this is proprietary. And I said, no, because you don't really know whether this is Marie Alexander. Right. And so when you look at that, take it, everything you see with a grain of salt, right? And challenge it and question it. And then also I'd say, if I'm giving people hints on how to use it, is look at it, and there are cues or clues in there that people can use to know whether to use AI to generate that. And one big thing they all do is there are lots of, in the writing style, there are M dashes, where it'll be a word, a space, a dash, a space, and then the next word. They're all the way through the documents, right? And you can immediately tell somebody used one. And with that, I come back and say, and don't use M dashes in this. Or I would say, get rid of this because it sounds like you wrote this. I didn't write it. And so they're just different little bitty things that you begin to learn as you're using it. But the way it's been the most helpful for me is just to help organize my thoughts, right? Help me organize it. But I've never used it to create a letter to send to somebody. I've never used it to write my stuff. I use it to edit sometimes, or sometimes there might be something I'm reading and I'll ask it to summarize this for me and explain this to me because I'm not sure I understand it. And so there are things like that where I find it can be extremely useful, very, very useful.
Yeah, as you say, as the AI is getting smarter and it's getting very, very smart every single day. So it's not like going forward, the humans are probably going to need to be very, very good at asking the right questions or asking the smart questions. Would you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely. And again, determine the way that you're going to validate the response you get. I think that's the part that worries me the most, because we have so much misinformation in our worlds now that I think we're going to see an increase in misinformation. And people will think just because this AI gave me that answer back that it's going to be true. And you don't know whether it's truth or not unless you go back and do a little bit of research and checking. And unless you say, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. So that's part of what worries me, or sometimes it worries me that people will get lazy, right? And that we'll lose, as AI becomes smarter, our population will become less smart. Our species will become less smart.
Maria, I'm
So,
going to be respectful of your time.
yeah.
It's been a very fascinating conversation today. If listeners remember just one thing from today's conversation, what do you hope should be?
I tend to say everything. I keep in mind everything I said could be wrong. And people think I'm trying to be flip, but I just told you to check everything that an AI thing returned. You should do the same thing with me. But I really think the biggest thing that I would want somebody that's looking at what do I do with AI is to recognize AI is a technology. It's just a means to an end. It start with defining what you need to do. Don't start with how am I going to take and throw this technology and do what they're telling me to do. Use your brain and decide what do I need to do, and force people to tell you how it can do that. And sometimes what you'll get back is that there might be something you could do that you'd never thought of. And that can be the case, right? And you look at that and take that information in, but have it solve your problem. Don't just use it because it's a cool technology. That would be my biggest thing, is just stop and determine how, if it's really solving something you need solved in your business.
That's a powerful takeaway. That's a fantastic way of putting it as well, Marie. So
Yeah,
really, thank you. Appreciate you sharing your thoughts. Finally, if someone listening to this podcast wants to want to get in touch with you, just want to say hello, what's the best way of doing that?
You know what? My email address is marie@mariealexander.com.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Email me directly. I can tell you how to go Google stuff about me, but if you want to talk to me, I would welcome any conversation you would want to have.
That's fantastic, Marie. Marie Alexander, thank you very much. Really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.